Hello, welcome back to Bitwig. Lately, we have been talking about polyphony and voice stacking. So let's build a power synth. What does that mean? I'm not exactly sure, but I've got some ideas that we can play with. Not too long ago, there was a sound pack released called Perfect Drift, which is interesting. A bunch of things from some friends of ours, some nice analog-y, warm, using new modules and things. One of my contributions was originally thinking about this video. So we're not going to rebuild this in its entirety, but if you want to follow along at home, there is kind of the pre-baked version over there. And it can be a little nice because the question is, how can we just make different notes, different sounds, different velocities, and different ranges have their own life, and maybe sometimes some life of their own? Yeah, so that's kind of what we're aiming for. So I've got a polysynth. It all came from this. It sounds the same, right? So if we look at the model for a minute, the default structure of polysynth is there are two oscillators, and they can be of slightly different shapes. It might be nice to see these scopes while we're working here today. We can blend between the two oscillators. We'll come back to that. Do a little more of that. So maybe... kind of have three different octaves there now, because there's a sub-element to the lower one. The higher one's a little different. Why not? So always the interest is modulation and things moving a little bit. Now, we've got built in the filter, so it's not going to hurt us to use the envelope generator maybe a bit. We can kind of curve it a little bit. Let's elongate it. Just so each note that's hit kind of has a life of its own. You don't have to go all the way down. So that's already one way of getting motion, something that's built into it. Often you've got a filter, if there's a built-in envelope or not. In this case, there is. So where should we go next? Maybe simple LFO is not a bad idea. And we could alter the shape a bit. Yeah, let's reset that. Something. It's a little quick. I can slow it down. Now, we always run into this question of mono versus poly. In this case, the LFO, you can kind of see that blue highlighting, is a mono signal. There's only one trace on here. It is the same for every note being played and held. So it might be fun here to go ahead and make it poly. I'm just going to keep it free. So they're all going to have a little bit of life of their own. Maybe even something like FM amount. That's kind of fun, but it's a little strong. I'm going to turn it off for now. I'm going to go ahead over here and shift-click in the inspector and just disable that modulation for the time being. Maybe we'll come back to it. So we've got our scopes moving a little bit, which I mean, aside from the visual aesthetic, means the sound is changing. And that's a little bit of something, a little grind. Now, how can we make these change a bit more? Well, we could cheat and just set the slightly wrong pitch, because the scopes are tracking to the pitch you played, but that's not really going to help us. What we did visit on our way here from a recent video was the idea of unison, which is just saying if there's multiple copies of each voice and they're all detuned around the center frequency by a certain amount, that can have a nice thickening, focusing effect. I'm not trying to go for all the extreme settings because I know we're going to be adding more things as we play around. That's not bad. Now let's just think and plan for a minute. There's different things that we could add range to. We've got these envelopes here, so we could make different notes faster or slower for their attack, their release, everything else, including the filter. We could even adjust this blend amount over time, which will pretty dramatically impact the sound. What else? Just in this pre-filter section, there's a drive control, which starts at unity. Now, if any of these parameters go all the way up for all notes, we're kind of going to end up in a brick wall. It's going to be a bit too much. There's also the noise balance. In limited quantities, that might be nice. And then, for 1 minute, let's just take a look at the structure of Polysynth, and I'll pull up the help view. This whole blend section, so I can just see all of the descriptions at once, it's interesting. The default is, hey, it's a mix knob. But then there's the idea of negating or inverting the second oscillator, and you get a different sound result. Let's go up an octave. Versus wipe, which is kind of a different type of fader, really. But if we're talking about tone changes, AM is the most extreme. Now it's saying, and we can see it in the window footer, oscillator 1 is now amplitude modulated by oscillator 2 by this amount. Interesting. Or to say, let's blend them, but take the polarity of number of oscillator 1 and apply it on oscillator 2. Which, once you start doing things like that, you can get apparent frequency changes to the sound. Or even max. Just take the strongest signal at any point, and we're kind of avoiding 0 a little bit. Now, all of these sound different and they're kind of nice. So we've looked at some parameters that we could give range to, and let's just think about how we could give them range. Because one possibility would be to take, let's say, velocity, which is going to give us a difference for every single note played, which means we can have multiple sounds at once by having different notes and different performance techniques. Maybe that means let's start everything a little slower. I think envelopes might be a nice place for this. So everything starts a little slower, and then the stronger the velocity, the shorter the envelope. Maybe that actually elongates the decay a little bit. Maybe feedback going into the envelope, into the filter section might be nice too. So just another little variable that's changing up the sound. Okay, so we've said some things that are going to be different for each note played. We looked at the blend level, which is fun. I think if we want each note to be different in this case, it might be helpful to go ahead and have an envelope. It just takes its time and moves it a bit. So now, bring it back down a little. So now, every note played is kind of being moved along that trajectory. Now, the reason a lot of modulators have an output level is because you might want to target that. Perhaps velocity creates a stronger envelope. And yeah, I could even speed it up a little bit too. So I've got some per note variety already. So velocity is targeting things, changing different notes being played. The envelopes are running freely and again, moving different parameters over time with each note being played. I liked drive, but it was too much. So maybe Keytrack would be a fun way to do this, where I usually like the relative mode, but here I just want to define a curve. Let's say, maybe big values, high pitches shouldn't do much, but below a certain point, let's start cranking the drive up. Because that's nice, but I don't necessarily want every note of a chord. Totally blowing out its wave shape at the same time. But we could duplicate the Keytrack modulator. Let's take another one and kind of do the opposite. Let's take it and say, no, we're only going to make higher notes go up now. So higher notes being played will create something a little more extreme. In this case, maybe a little bit of noise might be nice. So we already are going to have a you could even push the blend a little bit too. So now the different ranges on the keyboard are having different functions. Now, finally, we had this blend mode, and the problem is I like several of the blend modes. So my choice now is not to say I want different notes to trigger different things. My choice now is to say I want every note to trigger different things. Yep, here comes voice stacking. So if I go with a stack spread of three, or a voice stack of 3 notes, every note played will trigger 3 different notes, which means 3 different voices. And now I am going to modulate by 1. So voice 1 will be down, -1 to this other mode. Voice 2 will stay in sine, because that's a modulation of 0 or no change. And voice 3 will go to the maximum mode. So now, now every note being played is triggering all 3 of those modes at once. And honestly, you could do a lot more with voice stacking, but I'm just trying to do a little bit with a bunch of different tools and try to cover them. So I think I'm going to leave voice stacking where it is and be okay with it. Now, in the ultimate conversation of mono versus poly, there are audio effects. And no, we're not going into effects grid to make crazy polyphonic audio effects. We're just going to use normal audio effects. And I'll put them in the nested chain like a nice person would. If I'm thinking about saving a preset, that'll be handy. If I'm thinking about modulating it, that'll be necessary. So if I put the distortion in here, now that's fun. What's interesting with distortion is if you blow out a sound like this, single notes have a pretty harmonic response. But when you play more than one note, that's when it gets interesting because the harmony is blurred, the monophonic nature of this flattens the signal, and suddenly a nice little inverted major sixth is going to sound a little... That's a perfect fourth, right? Power chords, all right. So distortion can be fun. Now realize the mix knob is open all the way. In the end, we're gonna blend this a bit. And I don't always like doing the big crank the center part of the distortion up a lot. Let's go full wet for a minute just to hear it. But these other parameters can be nice. Now, the thing that is fun with Bitwig are the nested device chains. The nested device chains can be a lot of fun, and not only because of what they contain, but because of how they work. I'm going to go ahead to modulation. The classic modulation audio effects means they had an LFO in there somewhere. It means something is changing over time. So in this case, I do like a good flanger plus. It's got a bunch of modes. So being in the wet effects chain, this is a subtle but nicely complicated signal flow. Everything going into the distortion gets balanced by the wet dry knob, by the mix knob. So if it's here, I'm only hearing nothing coming out of the distortion, just the original signal. If I'm here, I'm hearing everything coming out of the distortion, and the flanger is only getting applied to the wet part of the distortion signal. But then, of course, I can blend it somewhere in the middle. So this idea of having a wet-only chain can be a lot of fun. Now, you heard the reference where this was starting from. Let's go through the sand dunes. I like the flanger because it has feedback and depth. Let's make it, maybe slow it down a bit and that's that autopilot feeling that I was going for. Now we're just kind of letting the distorted signal ride through the flanger, through its feedback and everything else. So that's kind of... We'll make a control for that in a minute. Now, post distortion, let's go ahead and add a reverb. Yes, convolution is fun and it does a lot of cool things. I'm gonna stick with reverb because I have this tank section. If we're talking about nested devices, now anything can be inserted, whether it's plugin or Bitwig device, into the feedback loop of this algorithmic reverb. And that sounds fun to me. So maybe it's time, let's follow the same path. Let's go with a chorus plus here. Another one of these modulators that moves over time. Let's slow it down. Let's make it wide. Give it a lot of depth. So there's a little bit of color there. And then, I know we like to have a twist. We could call this a twist. Let's add the most boring thing in the world. Let's add a tool device into the feedback chain of the reverb. Why do I want a volume knob in the feedback chain of the reverb? Well, because in certain cases, if I am boosting this signal, if I create a positive feedback cycle, it's just going to ring out a bit. Now, that's nice, especially when the signal is ending, but I don't necessarily want the loud signal coming in to get boosted super strong. That might be a mess. So let's look into modulator land. What can listen to audio and average it over time? And then use that to say, well, it's too strong. Let's bring down this gain. And then just slowly let it back up. Whenever it gets quiet, and give it a bit of a boost. Okay, that's a bit long. But that's fun. So we're halfway there. Halfway, we're done basically. So we're pretty much done. Now, where I wanted to go was just a bit of a macro. Remember, we had this autopilot business. Now, the idea of it, let's just do a quick exercise in assigning macros. What's going to make life easy, it's not routed to anything yet. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this up all the way. And that has no effect until I make these assignments. So now I'm setting the most extreme version of this knob. And we can pick some parameters. Maybe let it ring out more. If this is the most extreme version, I never have to go this far, so I might want some range in between. And maybe... well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. The only thing I might go ahead and add here is to bring the gain down just a little bit. Because then in autopilot I can bring it back up and accompany it. Now, with most instruments, last little note, this is a per voice gain. So something that voice stacking helps us with is the idea of creating a random signal because it's going to be different. I'm playing one note, but I'm getting 3 signals out, one for each individual note. So let's make that smooth. That's not a bad speed. One thing I want to do here, just to use random, so this is leveraging voice stacking, is just saying, bring the gain up and down a little bit of the different voices. So it's just backing off a bit when each note is played, and now it's on its own kind of cycling through the different places. So, got some variety in there with velocity, we've got some variety in there with key range, got some randomness happening on every layer and some unison. It's just a lot of tools at your disposal. You don't have to use them all at once, but it can be fun, dare I say, powerful. Thanks for tuning in. See you again soon.